everybody. How's it going? I'm trying to, okay, I'm live. One of the things that you will quickly see is that this is a very international panel, and I want to really thank the conference for bringing here people who are making change all over the world, and I really applaud that. To my left directly is Maria Ressa of Rappler.com, who has been covering corruption and politics and more in the Philippines and other countries. Next to her is Natalia Gumenyuk of Romdasky TV, which is from the Ukraine and is available in both English and Russian. Obviously, the Ukraine has been putting the Russian invasion of the Ukraine has been putting an incredible strain on citizens as well as journalists. And next to Natalia is Natalia. We needed to have the Natalia version of boy-girl seating, but Natalia Viana is from Agência Pública, and she is covering Brazil. So, and then next to her we have Jessica Lessin, who got a shout out in, okay. Jessica Lessin, who, I guess they're switching mics, okay. Jessica Lessin, who got a shout out for her tech publication, The Information. So I want to welcome you all. And Maria, let me start with you. I was really impressed with your coverage of President Aquino and the killings of the 42 officers. I want to do a speed round of questions here first and, really ask you to give me a sense of how women entrepreneurs are changing the world and how technology is changing the landscape, particularly for women media entrepreneurs.
So I think on my end, I've been a journalist for 30 years, most of that, all of that in television. 3 years ago, we started Rappler, and it actually made me, let me put it this way. I headed the largest news group, and I found that when you're managing 1,000 journalists, it's very, very difficult to make it move at the pace that we need to move now. 3 years ago, I started a little company with 12 people, and we're now more than 100 people. What's the goal? The goal, I hate to say, Amy, to scale, because I don't want to be a journal. After you have 200 million people that you're telling a story to, you want to be able to scale to reach that many people. So the first is technology now actually allows us to do far more than just tell stories. And if I were to just put it in two ways, what our goal is in Rappler, and I started it in the Philippines, but we just opened a bureau in Indonesia, in Jakarta. The goal is two. One is both these countries need help with building institutions. So we're coming at it in two countries with very, very active social media communities bottom up, to help build institutions bottom up by helping build communities of action. And we use the journalism, which is necessary, which gives credibility. We use that as the food that creates the ripples that move the communities to action. That's hard in 2 minutes.
But you did it. You did it. You set an excellent example for everyone. So we're going to circle back to all these issues. Natalia G. Tell me a little bit about the demands that the war, essentially in the Ukraine, has been placing on you personally and on your journalism institution.
So yeah, it's great to be here, but to explain a bit what our media is, it's translated from Ukrainian as a public TV. We were a group of Ukrainian investigative and political reporters. I used to cover conflicts all over the world, and we understood that in a lack, when there is no public media in the country, we would create it. So we more or less self-organized group of public servant, which organize this media, which interesting enough has broken a world YouTube record for live casting. Now, of course, I'm also running the English, besides everything, English and Russian version of it. But what is interesting that it was very important and I think it wasn't very hard for us to run a newsroom which is run and done just by journalism. Our media belongs to journalists, and we always, it's run by a board of around 10 people who are the creators of it, and there are both female and male, and it's a lot of discussion because it's not easy to run a media which is created by a bunch of ambitious young political investigative reporters without any other managerial illegal stuff. And now, of course, we are fighting the Russian aggression, and of course, it's very hard for us to report, as we are, let's say, it's almost as a report on your house burning, but we try to cope, really, to provide everybody with important information. And interesting enough that we have to work a lot on the front line. My colleague, another female journalist from my organization, is currently really on the forefront of the conflict. And what is surprising in our team, two of us, both, like, let's say, frontline reporters who are constantly working in a war zone, they are both female. That's how it works. I won't, and for me, there would be a lot explanation about that.
I want to talk to you more
about
about it.
We'll talk about that.
Yeah, thank you, Natalia, and I definitely want to talk about gender in the front lines, which you have a lot of experience with. And now, Natalia, Viana, tell me why you decided to found Agencia Publica.
I always say that I never wanted to be a women entrepreneur, but we had to invent Publica. Publica was born when I was together with WikiLeaks leading the leaks of the Brazilian documents in Brazil, and we partnered up with two mainstream media. After 2 months, they wouldn't touch some subjects. They would not touch human rights issues. They would not touch anything that spoke ill of companies, and they would not bring stories that needed more investigative work. In the meanwhile, people wanted to see these stories, and there was a bunch of journalists that really wanted to do these stories, but didn't have an outlet. So we put 15 volunteer journalists in a room and said, let's dig these documents for a full weekend, let's put out the stories for free. And we did, and the media used them, and everybody was very happy, and that was the very start. This is still the core idea of Publica. It is a news agency, but only works with investigative journalism. We do a lot, especially we cover human rights abuses, and we are focusing a lot on companies doing human rights abuses in Brazil. We distribute them for free for the legacy media and for blogs, for Facebook profiles, for everybody who wants to reproduce them. And we have a 3I policy. Everything we do is independent, investigative, and innovative. We have learned in these 4 years that we also need to push a change in the media, and with that we have started giving out micro grants for independent journalists. Now we are also mentoring and incubating new organizations in Brazil.
Thank you, Natalia. And Jessica, you started the Information, which we heard about in Amy's presentation. So tell us why.
Thanks for having me, everyone. It's great to be here. I started the Information about a year ago because I think the business model in news is broken. I think that the vast majority of publications are depending on advertising, and that's causing a race to the bottom in the quality of content. And I think it's happening across the board. To me, a business model that sort of pulls up the quality of journalism, that inspires us to write better stuff, is a subscription model. Doesn't matter where you set your price point. If it's really high, you're going to have an audience of a certain caliber or a certain structure. If it's lower, it'll be something else. But to me, it creates that incentive, whereas journalists, we're trying to write to deliver value, to say something new. I was at the Wall Street Journal for 8 years covering tech, and I was sick of writing the 18th version of the story of the day that everyone else was writing, because there was this mentality there and elsewhere that the job of a journalist is just to sort of cover what happens and write stuff that people will click on. And I felt that this was happening where the demand for the kind of news that we focus on, which is business news on the technology industry, was never greater. The audience globally is massive. People will, it's sort of not a question of how do you squeeze into the time of their spending already reading news, it's how do you write something that they feel like they have to read. We want to expand that time. And so a year in, where just this morning got the signed documents from our 10th employee. So we're growing, based in San Francisco. We have 4 reporters from the Wall Street Journal and several other awesome ones. And we publish twice a day. We're $400 a year. We focus only on stories that we think professionals in tech and finance aren't getting elsewhere and need to read. That includes huge breaking news as well as analysis. And on the business side, it's going incredibly well. We're ahead of where we thought. We're in the thousands of subscribers. There's no doubt in my mind that this is a sustainable model. The question for us is just how big, and how big can it get? And on that front, we think we're building the next Wall Street Journal or Financial Times. Our goal over many years is not to be niche, if you will, but to really use our base of being relevant and a must-read for professionals in the tech industry to be a must-read for professionals in all industries who see how tech is changing their business. So that's what we're up to.
Thank you. I want to go back to you, Maria, because I had one of those moments. I consider myself fairly, world-wise, but, many years ago, but not as many as I'd like. I figured out how big Indonesia was. And I was like, oh. And so it's interesting to me that that's your expansion plan and you talk about scale. How do you view your scale after what Jessica was saying about how she views the scale of what she wants to do? How do you view your long-range vision?
In the immediate term, this year the Philippines is about 100 million people. In a year and a half, we became the third top online news site. And we scaled using technology. So I think journalists, we need to be better at what we do to cut through the noise. At the same time, though, we need to use technology better to spread faster. And Indonesia, because it's got 250 million people, as a market, as a business person, I think that's the biggest lesson I've had to learn. Although I ran a news group, a P&L of someone else's money is very different from the P&L of yours. I am the biggest shareholder in Rappler, and I've put in my own money and enticed others to put in their money. So it's first is the market. I think we're doing the same thing in different ways. It's just, again, for us, it was easier to scale because media corruption is so rampant. Corruption is endemic in both of these countries, and credibility matters. And the 20 years I spent with CNN in these two countries actually did give us a boost, but then what do you do after that? Because the next generation, the 20-somethings, the median age in the Philippines and Indonesia is between 22 and 23 years old. So there are that's the news market now. How do we get them in when only 1% care about the news?
And Natalia, Viana, I just saw Citizen 4 last night, and you mentioned WikiLeaks, and of course, Citizen 4 is more about the Snowden leaks, but it references WikiLeaks, and it has Julian Assange in it, the documentary about Snowden by Laura Poitras. So I'm wondering if you could explain more how you see yourself balancing the regional and national needs of Brazil and Latin America with sort of global news and overarching international news.
Well, what we do is we do very few stories. We only do investigative stories. We do 2 investigative stories per week, and because they're very long, they're deep. It's intense. Like, it is intense to read, but we work a lot on spreading the stories. This is our main thing. We don't want to attract people to our website, but we want our stories to go everywhere, and it's being published in the mainstream media in the world. So we basically focus on lines of investigations that we think are important for Brazil. We did cover some international issues. For instance, the coup in Paraguay. I went myself there, and I did an investigation about what happened when Lugo was impeached. But we end up covering stories that are is the opposite. We cover stories that are of international interest, such as the World Cup and now the Olympics, because they're based in Brazil. And now we're trying to work on how we get these stories out, how we get a better translation and to be published more by media from abroad. We've been published by The Nation, by the Huffington Post, but we're trying to do it reverses.
Jessica, I wanted to talk to you. I went on your site and read the beginning of a fascinating article about how 1099 wages, Uber-style wages, will kind of possibly depress the quality and increase the cost for W-2 employers, so-called traditional employers, even though there are fewer and fewer of them. And I was like, oh, I really want to read more. But now, after hearing that it's $400 for a subscription, I'm just not. Mm-hmm. So how do you balance? Sure. How do you balance the stans, meaning the diehard fans of your site, and that business model with the idea of discovery?
Sure. There is a monthly for $39.
Okay.
So to us, and this is a very different mentality, and it's one that actually excites me, we're not writing for everyone. We believe in knowing your audience. And so this doesn't mean that, I don't think this is sort of an elitist mission. I actually think that producing great content for an audience has that content out there and has all sorts of effects in broadly educating the world. So I think it's, I share the mission of being a journalist because I want to make people everywhere smarter and to learn more and lead better lives. But we're not writing for everyone, particularly as a startup in these early days. And I think you have to know your audience, right? When we hear tech companies out in Silicon Valley talking about using your product, who's the audience, who's the user in the BART subway that I love that example of. And I think that's so important, and that as journalists, if we don't know our audience, we're not going to be relevant. Because our audience is going to be fragmented and spending time in so many different places. So for us, focusing on a person for whom our value proposition is worth that amount of money to them, $1.09 a day, which is actually, we think, a very broad group of business professionals, that's what's going to make us relevant to them, and that's what's going to allow us to do that journalism that keeps them coming back. Now, over time, if we're successful in that, I think we have lots of opportunities to continue to reach more people, but I get this question all the time, why not have some free or one a month and something like that? And it's because we would lose our focus. We'd lose that true north of who are we writing for so that we can be awesome today, and over time we'll expand that.
Before I go to Natalia Gumenyuk, I want to point out that there's going to be a brief question and answer period at the end, so start cogitating on that. But Natalia, I wanted to ask you two questions. First of all, this question of women reporting on the front, which you have a lot of experience with, and I think your analogy of reporting on your own house burning down is very poignant. So how do you find the strength to do it, and what demands does it put on you and the organization?
And then the second one.
Yeah, and then I'll tell you the second one.
Okay, the first one, I think it comes for me from my experience reporting from the Middle East, and I think I always argue it's much easier for a female to work, especially in the Arab world or elsewhere, because you're not a threat. People are aggressive, or they can threat you if they consider you a threat. If you are not, it's okay. And that is one thing. The second is, I don't think it's special for female, but still you maybe sometimes have a bigger picture of war because you're not so much into, the caliber of any particular weapon, or you have more or less, let's say, general picture, and that's what sometimes people say. So, but in Ukraine, I don't see the much difference. I think that we also should consider that in Ukraine, at least, there are more journalists on the managerial positions in the newsrooms. There are more journalists in different positions. Probably for me, the answer is because it's not a profession which brings you a lot of money.
And the second question I had was more about your revenue models, because you mentioned that you've had this incredible success. You're a heavily video-based platform, and you've had incredible success on YouTube, but how does that affect your revenue model, and what is your revenue model?
So we started as a public broadcasting, taking more or less the code of conduct of BBC, being the non-profit organization organized by the citizens. We were launched in the situation when there was no lot of aspiration. We were told by a lot of managers that there is no chance of success because the Ukrainians are not used to paying money for any information, which was a totally wrong answer, because when we were launched, and it happened just by coincidence that we started with when the revolutionary event started, so people were just sending a lot of money to us, and for the first year up to 70% of our funding came from crowdfunding, and I'm talking about the few $100,000 of dollars. But now it's a bit different, because more or less in Ukraine volunteering became so popular. It's more or less like a second state, so people give a lot of money for funding the army, helping the injured, helping the internally displaced people. So we kind of not in the time when we really ask for money. Maybe it's temporary, but I think we just a very low cost production. We started with the web, therefore we always think that it's better not to ask for the subscription, but let people just donate. That the fact they donate to us, this is the way the way we work. We want our media to be shared, so we don't sell any information, and more or less it works. And I'm coming from the commercial media before, and I think that I've never experienced that in my life as well as my colleagues. After every report and every interview, I get a lot of thanks. People write, thanks for making this interview, thanks for going there, thanks for reporting this. And I think it's something which substitute other funding. Of course it's necessary, but with all online technologies, we manage to have a very low cost production.
Absolutely. And so all of you are very successful and very good at what you do, using different models in different ways. I'm hoping that you can keep this relatively brief, but I wanted to run down the line with two different questions. The first one is something you learned on the business side of doing what you do, and then the second one is something you learned on the editorial side. And I'm going to start with you both times, Jessica, and just go down the road. So business side first.
Business side first. God, there are a lot of things. I mean, not to beat a dead horse, but I mean, people will pay for content. And I mean, this was a hypothesis in some ways, although, at the Wall Street Journal, FT, Bloomberg, so it wasn't really, but there is no doubt. I mean, we have entrepreneurs who are bootstrapping their startups who are paying $400 a year. We have Eric Schmidt, so I think it's important to go into the mentality of building any product from what can we build that would be so valuable that someone would pay for it. It may not turn out to be the right business model. There are different types of content. We have a very particular audience, but I really look forward to the day we can stop asking will they pay and start saying what can we do that's so good that they'll want to as a starting position. And there's just no doubt that works. And we see it, like if we write a great article, it'll drive a lot of subscriptions. If we write a shitty article, it won't. And so there's that kind of feedback loop, which is also such valuable data. On the journalism side, so every time...
Why don't you wait? I'll just do a
sorry.
whole business... No, that's okay.
Good, I can refine my answer.
Yeah. We'll do a whole business round and a whole journalism story round. So, Natalia.
So, okay, I have two answers for the first question. It also goes to the second, but I'll try to make it short. The first one is very brief. What you learned on the business model, do your thing, do your journalism, and money will come. You have to have your work out there, and this is how you have to start. You have to show the world that you can produce very good journalism that other people are not producing. And people will pay attention to it, and in the end, you get funded, you get grants, and you get eventually paid for subscription. Something else that we learned that we are improving now is that each year we are inviting people more into the process of making journalism. And we are doing this with our crowdfunding operation. Instead of crowdfunding for Publica, we are crowdfunding, and donors will be able to take part in our editorial process. And we've had one in which we raised $25,000. We're in the middle of another one now. And what we are doing is everyone who donates will get access to a website in which every month we are going to put 3 stories that are hot stories at the moment that we want to investigate, and they will vote. After they vote, they get invited to a Facebook secret group where they will share with journalists what journalists are doing, and then eventually they will work on the distribution side as well. They will help us spread the news because we are a news agency. This has brought a lot of money and interest because we are inviting them to join the editorial process, and it works.
That's fascinating. Natalia, Gumenyuk?
I'll agree with my colleagues that probably producing the content which is relevant is the ultimate way to do that, because that's why the people, if you don't do that, the people won't donate money. And for us, it also matters that because we are non-profit and we don't have commercial so far, somehow people feel that we are not earning money with them, with reporting, that we are doing that as a public service. And I do believe in this idea of the public service. Therefore, we're in a pretty unique situation. We don't have a public service television in Ukraine. So we more or less, so far, we substituted. And there is still a model when probably there should be some donation, either from, I won't say from the state, but from some of the maybe donor organization, foreign or even Ukrainian, that can provide the funds for a good journalism, because it definitely costs money. And there is one challenge when people really feel, for us, when they feel that they are paying. It's the most challenging job for me as well, because after every single report for every journalist in our network, everybody feels that he or she can write what is wrong and what is right, and what we should report, what was missing. It's a huge challenge, a daily challenge, but that's okay.
Oh yeah, everybody is backseat driving. And Maria, I noticed that on your site you have like a mood metric for each story, and you have strong engagement. But just tell me what you think, is a business lesson.
Sure. It's a four-phase model, and it's strangely the business model is the same as the journalism model. It's taking the tools that are there, but monetizing every step. So content creation, you'd call it native advertising, but it's clearly labeled on our site for advertising. That first phase. The second phase is social media engagement. We sell that, and it's also clearly labeled, and that's part of the way that our community supports us. The third phase is crowdsourcing, but crowdsourcing in this one, we have a patented user engagement model. Every story has a mood meter. You click how you feel. We worked with psychologists and sociologists to say, what are the 8 moods that Filipinos and our Southeast Asians look at? When you click how you feel, that's aggregated into the mood of the day. There's a mood navigator in the middle of the front page. That is a way you navigate the site. We sell that too. But beyond that, the crowdsourcing end is crowdsourcing action. And then the last part is crowdsourcing leads to big data. And I'm just going to ask if you could please put, so this is the outer end where we take unstructured big data of social media and show you the communities and how you can move those communities. We monetize that too. So right now, we're creating a community using the hashtag Code15. We built a tool. And strangely, it came from my job as a journalist, as it working on terrorism, right? So I looked at how terrorism spread. One of the things that we did is I worked with Core Lab to look at how terrorism spreads on social media. And this was in 2011. Those same tricks you can use for digital marketing. So look at this. This is, I spent an hour talking about this, but this is the community. If you zoom in, she typed in code 15, and then zoom into this. Is this a new one? Okay, so you plugged it in, I wanted you to see it. Zoom into that. If you zoom in, you can actually look at the individual granular detail. Each person here, what they're tweeting, and then keep zooming in. Go ahead and zoom into it, and then you can see that the community that has, well, right now, IWMF, earlier, I think it was Amy, was the most influential. And then obviously, if you're looking at that, whether it's counterterrorism or whether it's digital marketing, you look at who it's by eigenvector centrality. You would probably know it as PageRank from Google. It's similar. The larger the circle, the larger the influence. And then when you look at that and you look at the communities coming together, if you want to spread a message, social media spreads 3 degrees of influence, right? And how does it spread? Who are the ones that you want to target? It works. I'll tell you, that's how we grew our community. We have an average of 19 million page views a month, 71 million unique users. So it works as a business model and as an editorial model. But I think we journalists have to move into the world of tech. The tech guys have been making money off of our work, and yet we let them, Sorry for the tech guys. I mean,
Don't feel sorry, they have the money.
I just think we can do it. We know the content, we know the behavior. This technology allows you to use behavioral science in a way that we never could before, and we should.
Fascinating. So I'm just going to do a quick round of like maybe a granular editorial lesson from your company, something you learned to do or not to do or experimented with, and then we're going to go to questions. Jessica.
Well, I was just going to pick up on the community theme. So when you have paying subscribers who are telling you their identities and interests, that is such an editorial asset. Just one example is we've started a monthly poll where we ask our subscribers, actually, we have lists of companies, and every month we ask them how their sentiment around the company is changing. So we have all this data, particularly about a lot of big private companies like Dropbox and Square and Uber, that's very valuable to people that they don't report a lot. So surveying them, last month we asked them to ask us questions and then just reported back and got a wealth of story ideas as well. So that's been a huge, huge, huge thing.
Natalia B?
Well, on the editorial side, I'd say the opposite that everybody says. Write long pieces, good pieces, and deep, thick pieces. You will attract audience. The thing is that the internet, this is quite brief. People say that, people in the internet, they want to read short pieces. That's bullshit because everybody's in the internet, absolutely everybody. people who want to read short pieces and the people who want to read big pieces. The people who want to read big pieces, if they are investigative, they are the leaders. So you are influencing these people, and then they write short pieces about your big piece. But eventually, you get the word spread. That's basically it.
No, that is so true. Natalia G.
For us, it's definitely a unique experience because our organization is growing within the first during the time of the revolution, later now at the time of war, so which is a very unique experience for all our journalists and our presenters, anchors, reporters, everybody. It's a big shock to live in a totally new environment. And what is our more or less the lesson for us? We just recently had a big discussion with our regional reporters as well, how to implement the editorial standards, which is, I find, something very unique for the organization, which is self-organized. We don't have any obligation. We are not a BBC. We are not like, we don't have a big boss. It's just for us to come together and to agree on the particular editorial standards, which would be the same for personal profiles of our anchors and anybody who works for us with us at the social networks, and just explain for ourselves why it's really important. So it was a long time. For us, it was also important that we made a lot of mistakes, but always when we discussed with our editorial board, without our team, and went public with accepting, saying that in that way we went too emotional. We sorry for that, and we try to make it better. So that probably would be our lesson.
Yeah. So basically having a feedback loop where you're responsive to criticism, but also where you don't fall into everyone gets to be my boss, which you were talking about earlier.
When I ran the largest network in the Philippines, the two drivers were crime and entertainment. That's the primetime news. And we tracked it minute per minute, actually second by second, right? Now in Rappler, our primary driver is investigative news. It goes back to the credibility, and this is actually always what I wanted to do and never really could do in mass media. Well, I could. I lived through the golden age of CNN, where we got there before, stayed, and stayed after the story. But so for us, our soul is an investigative. We want to set the news agenda, and that's happening now. Over the weekend, 44 Special Action Forces were killed trying to get this high-valued terrorist. It's, the most wanted terrorist in Southeast Asia is a Malaysian named Marwan. His brother was arrested in the United States in 2007. So we're ahead of that and telling what that story is through our sources, including through somebody I got from DC while I was there, right? And at the same time, though, we can't be armchair purists, because if we are, we will lose this next generation. The reality is, they've got BuzzFeed. Again, BuzzFeed, I know you're here, but I'm not saying anything there. It's just they've got a slew of authentic. They've got a slew of the emotions. And that's also something we were taught as traditional journalists, that you keep your emotions away. Well, that's not where they are right now, right? So you've got to be authentic. And it's part of the reason that the founders of Rappler, 4 or 5 of us are above 40. I'm 50. I'm 52. 52 this year, so old enough, but young enough, right? So the 4 or 5 of us decided that it was easier to hire the brightest 20-somethings we could find. Not an offense again. It's just that when I was doing this in the network, you roll out new processes and new policies and new tools, you get resistance. It's a culture change that needs to happen in the traditional news groups. But you give a Mac and the new tool to a 20-something, it's like Christmas. And I saw that. So our 20-somethings do things that I would never consider stories. But they're number one. And even our native ads, clearly labeled, become number one. So it's a very fickle audience nowadays. And when you say you have to know your audience, you do, but who? Who of it? Maybe an algorithm can do, but I actually think algorithms can't all the way. They need to be coupled with human intelligence. The technologists will always tell you the best thing is to get rid of the people. That's how you scale on their end. Really, sorry. Again, not to, the way you scale is by making things exponential growth, and it's the technology that'll do it for you. Journalism has always grown linearly, and now linear growth is no longer enough. when you've got Uber and Airbnb. So what do? I think it goes back to the editorial. I think it goes back to your soul. And I think we need to keep that.
Maria, can I just
Yeah.
Why is linear growth no longer enough when we have Uber and Airbnb? What do you mean by that? Is it a funding? What's the competition there? They're very different businesses.
I think if you want to both get funding and scale, so we, as you can tell from the way I'm talking, we pump primed this, right? So I spent $3 million to get us to this point, and now we've raised another round. This is our Series A, really, so we're raising another $4 million. It's small by U.S. standards, but it's gotten us to this level now. For VCs, for VC funding, they want to see, a tech company will not look at anything below 10x. And if you're a journalist trying to go to a tech company, what I mean by 10x is just, it's growing times 10 this year, then it'll grow 100 next year, then it'll grow 1,000 to times 10, times 10, times 10. No journalist organization grows like that. And before, when I was managing a traditional news group, you'd be lucky if you get like a 40% growth. Wow, 20% was even high. We were already in a crowded industry. So why? Because here's where we fit into the whole massive change happening. In the end, we grew up in a world where it's the producer produces linearly for a consumer. But now with Airbnb and Uber and what we're trying to do, that consumer is also a producer. So if you can harness that, then you can get exponential growth. And it's the tech platforms that give you that exponential growth.
I'm going to jump in because I think I'm not sure, but you may have been talking about the difference in your model, which doesn't require we're almost out of time. So I'm going to see if I can take literally.
I totally disagree. So we're going to continue this later.
Yeah,
I think this is a big
because
problem that we're all trying to shoehorn into a different model that isn't the one. But to be continued.
Yeah. I mean, I'm literally only going to be able to take one or two short questions. Does anyone? Huh? Oh, we do. Yeah. Oh, okay. So that was. Oh, wait. You know what? Then if that wasn't the wrap for questions, then. Yeah, then why don't you say a little bit more, just briefly?
I just think that, we should be trying to build, the definition of success for the news business should be set by the entrepreneurs and the leaders and the businesses in the news business. And so if it's a question of having to go for 10x or 100x growth to get a funding source, well, if that's the mission of your business and you want to do that, then maybe you should, but it's not a natural rate even for some own tech companies to grow. And so what's happening in the tech industry is everyone's going out there raising at massive valuations with massive expectations and losing the value of their business and not knowing their business. And I think I see a lot of news organizations saying, I want to raise at tech valuation, so I'm going to tell a tech story. And I'm not saying tech, more than a quarter of our company is engineers. So, we're pro-tech, but you have to define what your business is, what success is, and for the vast majority of media companies, that shouldn't look like the kind of growth that tech companies are striving for, and by the way, not even getting, and so then we'll have a reckoning in that as well.
Yeah, I think, I'm just going to interrupt and go to questions, but I think every company that you represent up here on the panel has a different model, even though we've got two that are public-driven and two that are private-driven. So questions, one right here. Oh, you have to wait for the microphone, it's coming to you. Otherwise, it won't be recorded, and I was told to make sure it was recorded. And maybe you can just give your name.
I'm Margie Freivogel from St. Louis Public Radio. Maria, that map you showed us of the Twitter connections, where did that come from? Where did you type hashtag code 15 into?
It's actually something we developed over the last 3 years, but you can look at it. It's www.reach-social.com. And it is one of the ways we monetize, because what we do is after your content is out there and then you've got social media engagement, people are talking about it, you want to see your community. And the problem with digital marketing right now is all of these metrics that they use really don't mean a thing, right? Who cares how many Facebook likes you have, or who cares? In the end, I think it's about actionable intelligence that moves the needle on real world action or change. And so if that's also the metric that a company uses, then they have something. They can take that data and put it together with their own, did their sales increase, their own foot traffic, and then they can actually put it together. I think the challenge today is there's so much coming at you that you have to just figure out what you want to grow. Is it going to be the structured data that you have or unstructured? And you're going to have to put them together to see your whole community. But I'm on Twitter. You see me, so please just, if you've got questions, I can answer them.
Okay, we have one question here, and then see how long we have.
Hi, my name is Rachel Glickhouse. I'm a student at the CUNY Graduate School of Journalism. My question is for Natalia, Viana. In Brazil, the federal government is one of the biggest advertisers in the mainstream media, and that can really affect the editorial process. So what do you see as your role in creating more transparency and doing reporting on things like corruption?
Well, okay, if anybody follows the news in Latin America, they will know that since the left-wing governments became governments, the media has been quite critical in everywhere with different levels of harshness. I would say corruption by the federal government in Brazil has been quite well investigated by the mainstream media, even though they are one of the big funders. So I don't think that's the problem with federal investments. In Brazil, at least I don't see. There are very, very harsh, very critical, and very investigative journalism on the federal government. The problem is that nobody's investigating the companies, nobody's investigating the banks, nobody's investigating the opposition, which of course they do still hold a lot of power. And the other problem is the money is focused on a very, very concentrated media. In Brazil, 5 families own 70% of the media. So in the end, you have a very concentrated landscape. They get all the money, and everybody who wants to do something different don't get any money. Our role is a lot in transparency, but we focus a lot on companies. And we focus a lot on other levels of government that are not being investigated. Our mission is to do what the media is not doing.
Thank you. Next question.
Hello. Hi, my name is Yvonne Liao. I'm a Knight Fellow at Stanford. This question's for Jessica. I'm really curious. So I'll be the first to admit that, I borrow my friend's Hulu account and their Netflix account. And I'm sure there are a few other people who might be doing that too. What are some other revenue generating opportunities that you see for the information? And can you talk us through some of the trade-offs that you think about when you're trying to consider how to grow?
Sure. I mean, my conviction about the subscription business model only grows, right? So is there breakage in people sharing accounts? Absolutely. That's true of all subscription businesses. I once admitted to Jeff Bucas that I used my mom's HBO Go password, and he said, people have been stealing, HBO cable signals from their neighbors' apartments for years. It's part of the model. It's baked in. I now don't do that anymore, but still. So I don't see that as a flaw of the business model at all. Over time, look, subscription is going to be the heart of the information because we believe that what makes us different is not trying to be all things to all people, writing for a group of readers who we know and for whom we're valuable. That said, there are so many different revenue streams for media businesses. I don't have a religious aversion to advertising. I obviously think conferences and events are a model out there as well. Right now we do it very different. We have free events for subscribers. We have one tonight if anyone's a subscriber in New York. In helping to build our community. So I think that that's all out there in terms of business models, but the subscription it's more than a way to get money in the bank. It's really at the core of our differentiation and identity. On the trade-offs, I mean, it's really hard to say. I mean, if I'm writing because I want to have impact, I want smart people who are in a position to learn something and do something and act upon our information, do it. And from that regard, I feel like even at a small, direct subscriber count, we can totally do that. So I don't feel like there's a trade-off in that regard. For journalists who get a kick out of seeing the headlines on the top of all the news aggregators, there are certain aggregators that have certain philosophies around paid content. That's changing. We find that we are actually, if we are writing definitive stories about things, getting in the ecosystem. Business Insider writes several posts about every one of our long articles. So I think the trade-offs are really, there are certain types of journalists who actually find this model very threatening because it's, I have to write good stuff that people actually want to read. And so it's sort of hard to find the story and build the right culture around it. But from a business perspective and from a journalism perspective, I have yet to see any trade-offs.
All right, we have time for one last question. We're going to go right here. Wait for the mic, please. It's coming to you. And
Thank you. This is a question for Jennifer. I was wondering, what kind of sort of research did you do beforehand, and how did you lay the groundwork so that people knew your content was worth paying for? Since it started out as, how did you sort of establish yourself before you even got started?
Yeah, and I should say we've done no sales yet, really. I mean, so this is all organic growth, and so we started testing, like if someone's landed on the subscribe page, who's been on Twitter, if you tweet, we have a tiny little test to learn something, but it's all organic so far. The research was really, the conviction around the model was just the conviction as a journalist around the model and my experience at the Journal and knowing that when you write those stories, people will pay. So there wasn't a lot of market research on the idea. On price, there are a couple services like Business Insider has a Business Insider Professional. GigOhm has one that we're a similar price point. We're a few dollars more than month than the Journal, but I think for people who want this kind of content, it's a similar audience and they're not getting it elsewhere. So the pricing research was pretty much just ballparking it. Most of our subscribers think our price is very low, to be honest, in terms of the feedback we get. Now, obviously, the people who think it's too high aren't subscribing, but so it's really interesting to sort of figure it out. But it was basically a guess based on what was out there. And we were really are in the just gaining traction mode, not like the revenue optimization mode. So in terms of building it, so it was really based on the personal networks of the early reporters who joined and putting the content out there. So for the first 6 months after I left the Journal, we just put up a website, jessicalessin.com, while we were building the information so that we would have a place, if we had something to say, to write. It was also important to me, I'm really focused on hiring the best journalists we can, and you can't hire journalists if you're not giving them a place to write. So we sort of built up a little bit of a list through then, and then it's really just been, and we see it, we see the subscribers coming in through the stories. I think that's been our focus from day one. It's in part because of our own expectations around our growth, right? We are growing very, very quickly, but it's not 10x, and so that's sort of our path to building it. And now we'll be bringing on some people just to help with general subscription sales and funnel marketing and all of that. But you can grow, and if you're doing good work, people will hear about it.
okay, well, we're going to have to leave it there. I could talk to you guys all day. That's Jessica Lessin of theinformation.com, Natalia Viana of Agencia Publica, Natalia Gumenyuk of Romdanske.tv, and Maria Ressa of Rappler.com. Thank you all so much. Big round of applause, please.